Welcome to the Newsmakers Podcast. I'm Billy Hollowell, and this is a show where we go behind the headlines every day to bring you an interview with a pastor, entertainer, politician, or other notable news figure. And this is a show, again, it's daily, but it's based on our weekly TV show, which is also called Newsmakers. You can watch it on the CBN News channel and also on our YouTube page. And on this show, every day, we dive deep. It's a little more longer form with one of the people who you will often see on our Newsmakers show or across the CBN News platforms. Diane Foley faced a mother's worst nightmare in 2014 when the Islamic State beheaded her son, journalist James Foley. It was an international news story. James had been held by ISIS for 2 years before the horrific slaughter. It made international headlines and horrified the world. Yet Diane chose faith and forgiveness to navigate the most horrific of journeys. Today, she joins us here on Newsmakers to share her story and how she was able to persist through faith. With no further ado, here is Diane Foley. I want to thank you for joining me. And before we get into any bits and pieces of the story, and I want to talk about the foundation, I want to talk about James. I want to talk about your son, Jim, first, and who he was. I think too often people get lost in the headlines and they don't get to actually hear who a person is. And so tell us a little bit about your son.
Sure. Jim was the oldest of our 5 children. Friendly, curious little boy, a voracious reader, wanted to be read to as soon as he could read. He just was always reading. Very good listener too, even as a young kiddo. He liked to hear what other people's stories were. So when he finally found journalism, he really felt like he'd found his passion. He wanted to understand why people went to war, what happens to people in the midst of war, civilians, children, what are the effects? He truly loved it. And was just kind of an intrepid sort of kiddo. He didn't need much in the way of things. He's just had interest in people.
That's amazing. And once he started getting into journalism, doing it professionally and traveling, what was that like for you, as a mom, especially knowing the dangers of that?
Well, to be honest, I was rather ignorant of the dangers of it. I'm a nurse practitioner. I was busy with the 4 younger ones, and Jim was very good about keeping in touch. I think I was quite ignorant about how truly dangerous it is, particularly to be a freelance journalist. Jim started out embedded with military troops. I think particularly because 3 of his younger siblings were, in fact, in the military. And he wanted to understand what they were going through and why join the military, what happens to people in the midst of war. So it was something he truly enjoyed very much, was passionate about. He felt it was important, Billy, that those of us back here in the States had no clue what was happening in many parts of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Being able to shed knowledge and bring the information to people so they do understand. Even today, obviously, so many things happening around the world. People have no idea, and they're shocked when they finally understand or discover different, issues of persecution or violence that are happening in various parts of the world. So he was doing very incredible and important work. When going back to 2012, when did you first realize that something was wrong, that Jim was in trouble?
Well, we realized rather acutely because he did not call on Thanksgiving 2012. And that Jim always called on holidays. He always was in touch. He was very good about that, always reassuring us he was fine and asking how we were. So when we did not hear from him that Thanksgiving, it was kind of an ominous silence. And it was the next morning when 2 of his colleagues called to tell us Jim had been kidnapped very near the border of Turkey when he was trying to come home. He was en route to meet these colleagues on the border.
Hearing that as a mother, when you first had that information come to you, what went through your heart and your mind?
Well, we just couldn't believe it had happened because Jim had had a 6 week imprisonment in Libya when he had been held as a political prisoner when he was covering that. And that was in 2011. And he miraculously came home. And we thought that was kind of a fluke, that was rare. And so for it to happen again, it was like, it was a shock. And it was very different because this kidnapping was only witnessed by his fixer, who couldn't figure out who the captors were. He just vanished for the next 9 months. Whereas the other kidnapping, it was witnessed by a New York Times reporter, and we knew where he was. So that was at least reassuring. This time, we had no idea if he was dead or alive for the next 9 months. So it was horrible. Wow. It really was.
I can't even imagine dealing with that, adjusting to that. I mean, there's no adjusting to it. It's unimaginable as you're not hearing from him during that time. You have no idea what's going on with him. And going on this journey, which, was a 2-year journey of this uncertainty, talking to other people who have gone through this, people always have different experiences, but I will often hear they feel like people aren't listening. They feel alone. They feel like they're not getting enough help from the government or the media. What was your experience during those 2 years as you were navigating not just the emotions of it, but the very physical needs of needing people to step in and help?
Well, again, I was rather naive about the political scene, our hostage policy. I knew nothing about Washington. When I reached out to our government and people told me Jim was their highest priority, I really believed it too long. I was told to keep quiet initially, not tell anybody. So we went through Christmas and everything, just telling family and dearest friends. But by the beginning of the year, I just felt I had to reach out to media. I really needed help. But to be honest, the media wasn't that interested. It was just one guy who got lost, and he was a freelancer, not a important staffer, well-known staffer at New York Times or any place else. He was just an individual freelance journalist. So there was a little flurry of interest, some interest. I tried to get some interest from the media and the government. I quit my job and began monthly trips to Washington, but it was no one's job to bring Jim home. And over time, I began to realize that. And when the other European hostages whom he was with started to return home and Jim did not, that was about 18 months into his kidnapping. That's when I began to realize that our government was not prioritizing him. It really took me that long to figure that out. I had trusted a bit too long, a lot too long.
Well, you want to be able to trust. You want to be able to trust that your government and your media and the people around you are going to step in and help, right? How did you balance the frustration? I can't imagine the emotions, and I don't want to speak for you, but I would imagine you have obviously grief, anger, frustration. How did you not lose your mind in the process of fighting for your son and dealing with all that?
Well, primarily just because of, my faith in God, really. I mean, I prayed all the time. I had good friends and family encouraging me, but I wasted time. And that is why when Jim was murdered, I felt there was a huge need for a nonprofit like the Foley Foundation to hear families' needs and try to help them connect with the appropriate people in government, because I had no idea. And that kind of ignorance is not helpful. Our government has too many things they're trying to deal with. And particularly when it's a single person, a lot of times it's hard to be heard. Even now that there's been so much improvement in 10 years. I mean, more than 130 innocent U.S. nationals have been brought home. There's been a sea change. Now we have a hostage enterprise with professionals really who try their very best to help and support families. But nevertheless, there's a lot that families still have to take care of themselves. It's
well,
very difficult.
I want to talk about the foundation in a moment specifically and the work that you're doing because, all of this pain really, you've turned it into purpose and you are helping people and you're doing wonderful work. And I want to talk about that. You go through this 2-year period and obviously the end of this, finding out that he had lost his life. And, I want to sort of cap that part of the story here. But once you found out and you saw and the world saw, how did you cope with that? Because you had fought and believed so hard during those 2 years. What was that like for the story to come to that end?
Well, we were all shocked. I think our government was shocked, to be honest. We were all shocked. I think our government underestimated the Islamic State. I don't think there's any question about that. I was very angry because I felt I'd been patronized, even lied to, and sent in circles in Washington that I wasn't respected. I wasn't enough to tell me the truth, that our government had no plans to negotiate, for example. No one ever explained the hostage policy or the fact that we were not ever going to engage with the terrorists. So I was angry. And I really felt as an American that we could and had to do better, that this was unacceptable, and that Jim would have wanted us to channel our anger and whatever into something good for others. That I felt very challenged by Jim. Jim was a really optimistic kid. It was always the kind of person who always looked for the good in others, expected the good. So I felt very challenged by my God and Jim, to be honest.
That's amazing. And, you mentioned faith in God a few times, and that is the most important thing I would imagine anybody could have in life in general, obviously, but in the midst of something like this. And you talked about prayer, relying on God. How did you deal with the harder questions of the why? Most people, they find themselves asking that, why did this happen to my family? Why did this happen to Jim? Did that happen to you? And how did you cope with that?
Well, I think I really believe in a loving and merciful God. So I think my faith helped me. I knew that God didn't kill him, that it was the hatred. It was it's human beings. When we hate one another, we're all capable of horrible things and good things. And so that was the hatred that fuels the radical jihadists. And anytime any of us hate someone, that caused this horror. So that's where my faith helped me to separate those things and to recognize that my government also didn't mean for this to happen. It was just that we had to do better. And that's why that really was able to fuel my passion to advocate for us to do better and to work with the government and with the other NGOs to insist that we could do better, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And especially knowing that other families are going through this and will go through this, that's just a reality. Being able to be a person who is there helping. So let's talk about the James Foley Legacy Foundation. Let's talk about the work you're doing because this is important. And you took that pain, you turned it into purpose. Talk a little bit about the programs, what you're doing, and how you hope to continue helping those families.
Well, Bill, what's interesting, I think, as a parent is sometimes we don't know what our children become. And Jim was always a loving son, but I never realized his really unique gifts that really came out amid his horrible imprisonment and torture. And a lot of that was brought out in the James Foley story. That was a friend of his that wanted people to know who he was as a person. So that film taught me a lot and helped me to see how our prayers and his prayers helped Jim to endure. So Jim just aspired to be a man of moral courage. He really felt really good journalism required a courage to report the truth, to look at all sides, and to try to, as best one could, to present that truth to readers, if you will. So when we started the foundation, we aspired to inspire ourselves and others to, including our government, including journalists, to also aspire to that kind of moral courage, to dare to do the right thing by prioritizing the return of innocent U.S. nationals who are targeted simply because they're U.S. nationals, and to make our policies help them to come home, and to also help journalists to know how to be safer, particularly if they were freelancers and aspiring journalists, like youngsters who aspire to be a journalist. How can they be as safe as possible while doing this important work? So those were our aspirations. And 10 years later, it's really miraculous how many good people stepped up to make things better, truly. I mean, we started the foundation within 3 weeks of Jim's murder. And by June of 2015, the President Obama ordered a total review of non-government review as well as government review. So that meant interviewing victims like myself, other families. What did the government do right? How did the government fail? And they set up our current U.S. hostage enterprise, which includes an interagency fusion cell, State Department, entity just for hostage affairs, and a national security presence at the White House that actually acts on various strategies to help us free U.S. nationals abroad. So wow. That enterprise is what we now currently continue to engage with on a daily basis, really. We do research with hostage families and experts to find out what areas still need work. We need to work on deterrence, Billy. We obviously, don't want to incentivize any more of this. Thankfully, our research shows at present that has not happened. So we're grateful for that, but we need more research so that they stop using innocent people as political pawns like they're using in Gaza right now, or like Russia and China are using at present. So we still have many challenges, but there has been much progress, Billy. And I'm very grateful to the many people who've made that happen.
That's incredible. And what amazing work to be doing based on your experience too, and knowing what you didn't have access to, what wasn't there, what, could be changed to help. And it's such a delicate balance, I would imagine too, because you may try to do something new or encourage something new, and having to research that, as you were saying, and making sure that there's no incentive now, or there's no new, so it's you're dealing with irrationality and evil many times, right? People have been overtaken by these things. And so you're trying to operate within that. And that is a very difficult thing to do. And, I don't know if you want to comment on that at all, but I know there's a lot of complexity there.
There is. And I think a lot of it, Billy, gets down to be honest, now that we've kind of at least launched the hostage advocacy and safety curricula, which we're working to make more accessible digitally. One of my latest projects is I really feel we need to help our youth. I think this is a time of a lot of stress within our own country and the world. A lot of people who don't want to listen to someone who has a different opinion or looks differently, talks differently, that we need to find ways to encourage our students, our youth, to be people also of moral courage and to use their gifts for good in the world. And so lately I've been working with teachers at the high school and graduate and college level to find ways to bridge those gaps. I work with a civic engagement curriculum in high school and at the college level, so that students might be challenged to face this complexity, to help us to build more unity within our own country, care for one another, try to resolve these conflicts. It's very difficult. But it gets down to a very basic level that we need to be able to talk and problem solve with one another. Very challenging.
Yeah, even if you're not going to agree, being able to
Yes.
respect the other viewpoint and
Yes.
have a conversation, that is a lost art. And I love that you're doing that with young people, because that's where it starts. You know, I teach at the
Yes.
college level, and I have seen it even in the last
Yes.
decade. The inability to hear other views is a very dangerous thing, and so
It is, Billy.
we have to work on that. So I love that you are doing that
Well,
as well.
I think part of the problem, it seems like as our society has gotten more secular, I think we used to learn that in some of our faith traditions, taught to be kind, to listen, patient, love one another, all these challenges within faith communities. And I think as our society has become more secularized, I think sometimes children don't have the guidance as a
Yeah.
community of how they need to be taught how to hear one another, how to be kind to one another, how to problem solve when you disagree. It's not easy, but
No,
it's
and
so important.
yeah, I mean, from, sort of a theological sense, just for a moment, because I think it's important you brought it. When you sort of move God out of the equation, you have this void, and I think people fill it with other things, right?
I
Politics,
think so.
and so these other things become the thing that you're willing to die on the hill for, and it doesn't instill those values you were talking about.
It
Politics does the
doesn't.
opposite often.
E-
So,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah,
Even a lot of the gaming, video games, and social media can be very divisive and really, um, have children or youngsters. It can breed violence instead of breeding understanding and whatever. So we have
yeah.
a lot of challenges now.
We do. And, one of the things actually that your story, this just brings to mind, in light of what we're talking about, is forgiveness, because that is such a difficult thing. In a society where people can't even communicate, forgiveness becomes even more challenging. How did Jim's experience and what you went through either change or illuminate your own views on forgiveness?
Well, Billy, that's a great question because we must be able to forgive ourselves when we make mistakes. I have to forgive myself for failing Jim. How I wish, I mean, I should have figured more of it out, so I've had to try to forgive myself and to forgive those who didn't help me, who just, none of us are perfect people, and so to live with one another and oneself, to be at peace with others, we must find ways to forgive one another. And I think that's where the faith traditions often emphasize the need for that, whereas secularly instead we want to place blame or well, they're not my friend, or choose violence even,
Yeah.
instead of forgiving when someone hurts our feelings or doesn't hear our needs. So, to me, forgiveness is a huge part of loving one another, of unifying, bringing unity. So, yes, my faith, that was only possible with God's grace, only possible. No way on my own would any of that ever been possible, Billy. I remember shortly after Jim died asking my pastor to pray for me that I not become bitter,
Yeah.
because, I was very angry. Yeah.
Understandably angry. I mean, it's remarkable to me how you've carried yourself in all of this, because of what you've described, and the feeling fouled at so many different levels, and obviously the event itself, and what the Islamic State did, and there's just so many pieces of it. I mean, but another thing with your story that is so shocking and very fascinating is that in 2021 you met face to face, I know, with one of
Mhm.
James's killers.
Mhm.
Um, what was that experience like? Take us through why you felt that was important.
It was, well, there were a couple of things. First of all, those two jihadists, thanks to many good people in Department of Justice and Fusion Cell, all of them helped that to happen. And England, we had to work together. It took years, first of all, for them to be extradited here. But when they came, one insisted he on a full trial, no, questions asked. He wanted all he could get out of our justice system, if you will. Whereas the other one, Alexander Cody, pleaded guilty to all 8 counts. He pleaded guilty to everything: kidnapping, torture, accessory to murder, all of it, and offered to talk to victims. So he was different in that sense. At least there was an openness there, perhaps a curiosity on his part. In any event, I knew Jim would have met with him. He would have wanted to hear his story. Why did he become radicalized? What is his story, if you will? And the other reason, as a mom, is I wanted him to know who Jim was, because I think in the fog of war, it's easy to think of other people as things and not as human beings like yourself. So Jim challenged me to meet with him, essentially. And so initially we met for 3 different days, twice in the fall of 2021 and once in the spring of 2022. And at first, obviously, it was awkward. You know, he felt awkward. I did. But surely, as a mother, I have sons his age. It was easier to hear him as a young man, like one of my sons, who made horrible choices, if you will.
Wow.
And to feel the sadness of it. You know, when you choose to hate and hurt others, everybody loses. He's lost his freedom. He'll never see his country or family again. And we lost Jim in such a horrific way. The world lost him. But that's what happens. Look, that's what's happening in Gaza right now. So that kind of hate-driven blame, violence is the answer, just gives us all that hurt. Everybody's hurt. Wow. And the innocence, children, families are the ones that all suffer the most.
Absolutely. And are those conversations you think you would have again? Do you think you would have more conversations with him or others in the future?
It depends. It depends if they have an openness. I'm glad I did, because I also received several letters from him where he expressed a lot of remorse. And wow. I hope that that'll help him to redeem himself, if you will, because that's the only way, Billy. I mean, we must find ways to hear each other and heal this horrible divisiveness. Otherwise, we're all going to lose, everyone. And most importantly, our children, our families, our country, our world. So but it all starts at the one-to-one level, right? Yeah. So I'm very glad I went. And that was partly thanks to the goodness of Colin McCann, who accompanied me those 3 times, and the Department of Justice prosecutors and defense, who made that happen, made it safe for all of us and allowed it to happen.
Yeah, that is absolutely incredible that you were able to do that. And, you know, as you're describing all of that, I just think, you know, in these situations when somebody has done something so horrific, it's easy to not see them as human beings too, right? And I think from a Christian perspective, the idea that you want everybody to find Christ and change their hearts and change their lives, and that's not closed off to even somebody like him who has done what he did. And
exactly, Billy. Exactly,
absolutely.
Billy. You know, we're all sinners, right?
We're all sinners. Absolutely. You mentioned Gaza a few times, and we have to talk about this because here we are we're approaching the year anniversary of this. And when this first happened, and I know you followed it, obviously, so many families dealing with their loved ones being held, so much loss, so much death continuing. I think of Hirsch and that family and what they've gone through, and not the ending they had hoped for, obviously. But what went through your heart and your mind over this past year as you've just watched that horrific situation continue?
Oh, it just brings it all back. It brings back the horror on a big public stage, really, if you will, right? We're all watching the devastation of what war and hatred does. I mean, you know, beginning with the Hamas horrific invasion, capture of innocent babies, grandmothers. I mean, the whole thing. They, the hatred that caused that attack, and now the revenge, the hatred and the avenge. So it's just heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking. And the families I've met, um, we've tried to walk with them as we walk with any family who wants our help. The good part is that a lot of good people have stepped up to help them. They have had the voice of our president. He's been trying, but the reality is everyone has a free choice. Netanyahu has the choice to do what he wants, to prioritize what he feels. Same with Hamas, same with Hezbollah. So it's the choice we have as human beings to choose life and goodness and forgiveness, or the choice to choose hatred and revenge. It's just horrific. And I'm not happy that how I wish our United Nations could be more effective, but it just shows how tough it is. It's tough for us to forgive one another at a country level, at a, national, international level. The whole thing is a tragic thing. But I'm also very concerned about what's going on in our country politically, Billy.
Yeah.
We need to remember that we're all Americans and that we need to find ways to respect one another and hear one another. I know this sounds idealistic, but it's also basic,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just basic. We've got to be able to find ways to get along.
We're cut in
Or we're
half,
all
right? I
going to
mean,
lose.
we're split in half, this country, right?
Yes.
And I think that we have to remember that, because it means 1 in 2 people are going to disagree with you, most likely, right? And so you can't operate in a world where you pretend that half the country is terrible, right? You have to
Right.
understand why
Exactly.
people land where they land. And
Exactly.
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think we have challenges right here at home. And that's why I'm interested in working with youth, but also within the communities, that we need to start with basics and respect one another, try to hear one another. And to me, all of that's what Jim has tried to teach me. And I think he had all kinds of friends. He wasn't the kind of kid who had just an in group. He was the kind of kid who brought home kids who were homeless or had trouble at home. I remember a young man camping out in our camper all one summer because he was having trouble at home with his parents. But he was that kind of a kid. And we all need to challenge ourselves to try to hear one another and love each other. And
Even if we disagree, and that's okay.
yes,
It's okay to disagree.
yes, it is. It's okay because everyone has good points, right?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. How does your family, just as we sort of round out to a close here, how does your family keep Jim's memory alive? How do you honor him as the time progresses and we, move further away from what happened?
We really honor him. I think we always honor people we love by remembering them, right, in different ways. So every year, October is Jim's birth month. So every October, we have a virtual national, international freedom run walk. We do it in person in DC and New Hampshire, but we also do it virtually anywhere. We have one in Paris, a group in Paris, Chicago, different parts of the country who stand together to run for or walk for freedom, to celebrate our freedom, to disagree, to care about others who need our help, about our press freedom. So that's one of the ways we remember him. Another is every year we annually gather in Washington, D.C. and try to bring together journalists, government people, and hostage families so that they might have their voice heard and find ways to bring their loved ones home. So we tried. Jim was always the kind of guy who brought people together, Billy. All kinds of people, every size and shape and age. And so that's what we try to do. And in that way, honor that coming together. Because, and also as an humble little NGO that we are, we need generous people to care about one another, about people who need our help. So we always ask anyone to go to jamesfoleyfoundation.org or foleyrun.org to join our efforts to help others.
Well, that's amazing. And I want people to do that. And final question for you, American Mother, your book, I want to make sure we touch on that before we go to, because this is it's an incredible book, and it dives very deep into everything we're talking about today, much more detail going into your experience, what you faced, what your family faced. What are you hoping people take away from that book when they read it?
Well, I hope people can understand how love wins in an odd way. That we have to like when Jim was killed, for example, that's when all these good people stepped up from all over the world. We received buckets of mail from all over the world with donations from good people who were horrified. So I think a lot of times out of that goodness, we've been able to form the Foley Foundation, help more than 130 innocent Americans come home, help form a journalist safety curriculum, etc. When we love one another, good things can happen. When we try to forgive, hard as it is. And that book it's a small book, but it's just my journey and how God and the goodness of others has helped me heal and try to bring healing to others. So I've got to point out Colin McCann is an incredible Irish author who helped me write it and helped frame it in a way that's really, I thought he did a beautiful job in telling the story. So I'm very grateful to him. And actually, Jim chose him, oddly enough, Billy, because Jim loved Colin McCann. Jim was such a voracious reader. I had never heard of Colin McCann. And so when Jim was killed, many people sent Colin a picture of Jim reading his book, Let the Great World Spin. And that's where Colin reached out to me and offered to help me write the story. So
wow.
I'm very grateful to him. Yeah.
What an amazing connection on that front. And, I'm very grateful to you for giving us this time today, sharing your journey. It's incredibly powerful. And I just appreciate you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Billy. God bless you and all you do.
That's all for today's Newsmakers podcast. Be sure to tune in for the next episode of the show, and also head over to the CBN News YouTube channel and the CBN News channel to watch Newsmakers every week. We'll see you soon.